The approach and the close are the two parts of game that I wish you didn't have to do in cold approach, because they are the parts where you have to not just be the cool, aloof, high-value guy. The parts where you have to commit, you have to give your power away or give your value away to some extent. Fair. So for that reason, you have to do them, but I prefer they be as seamless as possible. To your point that the open, there is some value to opening, or there's some you get boldness points or something like that. So a lot of times, not that we should, it's kind of not the nicest thing to do, but we often rate women 1 to 10. We have our scale of how hot they are or how desirable they are. Well, you as a man are rated 0 to 10. Right? I'm not even giving you guys 1 to 10. The worst guys are zeros, right? 0 to 10. Right? But you have your scale of where you're at. All right? And each and every behavior you do falls somewhere on that scale. Right? And this is where, if you guys have ever heard me, I'm not going to get into this in depth here, but the idea of leveling, if you've ever heard this, that some behaviors immediately call attention to where you're at on that scale. Okay? They're leveling behaviors. A behavior might just say he's a 7, or he's a 5, or he's an 8, or something like that. And the funny thing is, here's a kind of a funny question. If you had a behavior that said to the women of the world, incontrovertibly, they know it absolutely, this guy's an 8, would you want that behavior in your game or not? Depends? Yeah. Depends on what?
If there's a 10 that I can implement instead of the 8.
Yeah, right. So yeah, it depends. You're like, if she's a...
If she's a 6 or 7, then yeah, because she'll love me.
Yeah, exactly. So if she is, rating girls again, but if she is a 6 or a 7 and you have a behavior that says empirically I'm an 8, that behavior would be extremely effective with her, right? It'd be very good, right? If the girl is a 10 or thinks of herself as a 10, and you have a behavior that says, shouts to the world, screams to the world, I'm an 8, that's not going to be very effective with her, right? The other thing it depends on is what the rest of your game is going to be like, right? If the rest of your game is going to be a 10, then you don't want that behavior that's an 8. If the rest of your game is going to be a 6, that 8 behaviors are bringing you up. So it depends both. It depends how hot the girl is. It also depends how good the rest of your game is. Let's say that opening, the behavior of opening inherently, there's better and worse ways to open, but let's say the behavior of opening is we'll call it I don't know if I want to call it a 6 or a 7 or something like that. We'll be really generous. Really generous, and we'll call opening a 7 behavior, right? It's not ideal. It's honestly not. You got to do it though. The reason to open is because if you can open and do cold approach, every single woman on the planet's available to you, right? And so you sacrifice that tiny bit of value to have every woman on the planet available. And what happens is the very fact that you opened is a 7, but if your open's really good, you can very quickly have a value behavior that looks much higher. It makes you look much higher right after the open, or by having your 1-7 behavior, it buys you 30 seconds or a minute or eventually 5 minutes because of what you do at that 30 seconds, in which you're like that one little isolated point where you're like a 7, and then you have all these data points of 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. And then she's like, okay, cool, that he's not a 7, he's a 10. Does that make sense? Right? Because it is just one isolated data point eventually. Right? So that's kind of how it works. But what you're talking about basically is the idea that, yeah, when you open, the girl knows you're not a 4. At least if you open with some kind of confidence that looks like you're doing. She knows you're not a 4, she knows you're not a 3, she knows you're not some average lame guy who's never had sex in his life. So yeah, you get some value out of that. And when I first started off in game, because the rest of my game was so shit, right, that 7 behavior is one of the best, that behavior of opening was one of the best behaviors in my game, right? Now, because what I'm going to do afterwards is really, really good, that 7 behavior is one of the worst behaviors in my game, right? And again, there's the thing about the act of opening, and then there's how you open. There are ways to open where your opening is not a 7. There are ways to open where if you're indirect or funny or teasing or doing something positive on the open, your open can already be an 8.5 or a 9 or something like that too. I'm just talking inherently the act of opening in a vacuum, especially opening with a direct open or something like that. The hi, I think you're cute kind of open. Does that make sense? There are better opens out there. So don't think that automatically you're doing some 7 behavior when you open if you do it right. And let's assume for now, just because it's simpler, assume it's a direct open. Not that I even think you should always open direct or whatever, but assume you said, hey, you're cute, I want to meet you. Okay, that's your open for sake of argument here. All right, the responses you could get to that are positive, negative, or neutral. Fair? Pretty much covers everything, right? All right, so when you get these different responses, each of these different responses, there's a correct response from you, right? So the response, if it's positive, is you should be escalating, right? And going back to this diagram, by escalate, I don't mean this escalate. I don't mean getting physical. What I mean by escalate, I mean going up the pyramid. All right? So you should be moving toward banter, flirtation, etc. Make sense? All right? So when it's positive, you should be escalating not physically, but moving things forward. All right? So where are we? Okay. So when you open and it's positive, you should be escalating in some way. You have permission. Hey, you're cute. I want to meet you. Oh my God, you're so cute as well. Oh my God, thank you. You're so sweet. Who are you? What's your name? Right? Escalate, please, when you get that positive response. Don't reopen and remind her 6 times while you walked over or talk about the weather or some shit like that. Okay? When it's good, you escalate. Fair? Good. All right. When it's bad, you change the topic. Right? For all the engineers out there. Change the topic. Right? And usually what you do is you back off, false time constraint, change the topic. Right? You open, she's not having it. Let's go, I got to go in a minute anyway, but really fast. You know what's really interesting about what you just did? Right? And you do something else intriguing, some new open. Right? And going back to, we'll go back to this one again. Right? If you open and it didn't happen, what do? You reopen. But you reopen with something different, please. Don't repeat the same opener that just failed. Right? Back off, false time constraint, open with something different, but you recycle the open because you specifically got a no, right, to escalation. Right? So a positive means you have permission to go there. Negative means you do not have permission to go there. Go back to opening. Fair? All right? So on a negative, false time constraint, back off, reopen. On a neutral response, and this can be just like she's not giving you a whole lot, she gives you a one-word answer, or like oftentimes it's thank you, which is literally positive, but it's like a hesitant thank you, a hesitant confused thank you, something like that. Okay, in this case, what you want to do is you want to elaborate. Okay? What you want to do, because basically what this means is your opening topic did not get rejected. So you have one more free bite at the apple with the topic. But oftentimes she just didn't have enough to respond to. So if you said something like, hey, you're cute, I want to meet you, and then she says, oh, thank you. Now elaborate, maybe in a way like, maybe in a way that has a push-pull or something like that, or in a way that gives more definition about what about her was cute, right? So, hey, you're cute, I want to meet you. Yeah, it's funny because you have like literally Death Note, which sounds fucking dark as shit, but you seem very cheery, so I'm very intrigued, right? So I just add to what was cute about her, why did I come there? Because again, I have one free chance to elaborate because there was a non-negative. Obviously, if after that she gives you a negative, you change the topic. If she gives you a positive, you escalate. Okay? Simplest diagram, but guys, fuck this up so much, right? They just keep opening and opening and opening all the time, or they plow mindlessly forward when they get a negative or a neutral. So a lot of guys, what they do is they think of game algorithmically. They have their shtick, their series of things they say. And usually your shtick is good for one of these three. So if your shtick is I open and then I escalate every time, well, every time the girl likes you right away and it's just positive, it's going to work kind of okay. Anytime you get one of these, it's going to suck. A lot of guys open and they always elaborate. Well, that's great when, it's this. When you could have escalated, it'll still kind of work that you elaborate, but you missed an opportunity, right? And when it's negative, you elaborated on the thing they just hated, terrible, right? And then if worst would be you open and then always change the topic, you're just always assuming a negative, right? So most guys have their shtick and they do the same thing every single time. There's 3 different responses, there's 3 different follow-ups, right? You need to have that ability, that nuance in your game to be able to handle the 3, all right? Cool. All right, and then one more diagram for you guys. This is a very simple, oh, by the way, last thing on this diagram. So this, I mentioned it's after an open, right? But you know what this could be? It doesn't have to be an open. It could be any escalation in the set, same thing, right? If you attempted some kind of escalation, it was positive, you can keep escalating more. If it was kind of neutral, you can kind of just like stay there and just be there and do like the same level. If it's negative, you back the fuck off, often with a false time constraint, something like that, and then you come back to it 5 minutes later once you've rebuilt the vibe, all right? So it's the clearest example on an open, but to an extent, this works on any kind of escalation. There's 3 responses, positive, negative, neutral. Escalate, stay where you're at, or go backwards.